As I entered my 70s, life seemed to take a cruel twist, as if time itself had conspired against me. The body that once felt invincible began betraying me in ways I could never have imagined. It started with small signs, shortness of breath while climbing stairs, or an odd fluttering sensation in my chest. But one fateful night, everything changed forever. My neighbor, Mrs. A., who always appeared so full of life and energy, collapsed suddenly during dinner. By the time paramedics arrived, her heart was struggling to keep up with its most basic function. She was rushed to the hospital, diagnosed with severe heart failure. Witnessing this shook me to my core. It wasn't just her story. It felt like a grim preview of what might await any of us. Then there's the haunting reality of genetics lurking over our shoulders like a shadow we can't escape. In my family, Alzheimer's runs deep, stealing memories and identities piece by piece. Just last year, Uncle Joe forgot his own grandchildren's names, leaving everyone devastated. We later discovered through genetic testing that several members carried markers for early onset dementia, a revelation that came far too late to prepare us emotionally. Knowing your fate is written in your DNA feels like being handed a ticking time bomb without knowing when or how it will explode. But perhaps the cruelest blow is the gradual weakening of the immune system, silently stripping away our defenses. One winter, I caught what seemed like a harmless cold, only for it to drag on endlessly, turning into weeks of relentless fatigue and fever. What should have been a minor inconvenience became a months-long battle, leaving me frail and vulnerable. For people my age, even common illnesses carry terrifying risks. An ordinary flu could spiral into pneumonia, threatening not just health but survival itself. Each cough, each ache, now carries the weight of uncertainty, reminding me daily of how fragile life has become. As the biological clock continued its relentless march, the choices we made about our lifestyle began to cast long, ominous shadows over our health. Sleep, that sacred refuge of restoration, became an elusive dream for many in their 70s. Mrs. A., who had once been the picture of vitality, now found herself trapped in a cycle of exhaustion. Each night was a battlefield, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't silence, her body aching from the fatigue accumulated during the day. The mornings brought no relief. Instead, they ushered in a haze of perpetual weariness. Her legs felt like lead, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. One fateful evening, while stumbling through the dimly lit hallway to check on a noise outside, she tripped over the edge of a rug. The fall left her with a fractured hip, a devastating injury that could have been avoided if only her body hadn't been so weakened by chronic sleep deprivation. It wasn't just physical pain that haunted her, but the crushing realization that independence, something she cherished deeply, was slipping away. Meanwhile, others clung desperately to what little control they thought they had over their aging bodies. Walking, though beneficial, became a double-edged sword when taken to extremes. Uncle Joe, determined to defy his genetic predisposition for early onset dementia, pushed himself beyond reasonable limits. He believed that logging 15,000 steps daily would somehow fortify him against the inevitable decline. But one chilly morning, as he trudged up a steep hill near his home, his knees buckled under the strain. The sharp crack of bone echoed in the quiet dawn, followed by his agonized cry. Rushed to the hospital, he learned he had torn ligaments in both knees, a catastrophic setback that rendered him wheelchair-bound for months. His wife, already overwhelmed by caring for him, confided tearfully to friends. He wanted to stay strong, but this obsession with walking has broken him. When what started as an act of resilience turned into a cautionary tale about the dangers of pushing too hard without balance. The ripple effects of these lifestyle missteps extended far beyond individual suffering. Families watched helplessly as their loved ones grappled with the consequences of poor habits formed over decades. For Mrs. A, sleepless nights weren't merely inconvenient, they were life-altering. And for Uncle Joe, excessive walking wasn't just misguided, it was destructive. Both stories underscored how critical it is to approach health holistically, especially after 70. While genetics and immune decline set the stage, it was ultimately the small, everyday decisions that determined whether one aged gracefully or succumbed to preventable ailments. These narratives served as stark reminders that even well-intentioned efforts could backfire if not tempered with wisdom and moderation. As the biological and lifestyle challenges of aging began to take their toll, the psychological wounds cut even deeper, leaving scars that no medication or exercise could heal. For Mrs. A, being placed in a nursing home by her family felt like a betrayal she couldn't comprehend. Her children had promised they would visit every weekend, but as weeks turned into months, those promises became empty echoes. She sat alone in her room, staring out the window for hours, watching cars pull into the driveway, hoping one of them belonged to her son or daughter. But they never did. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant laughter of other residents whose families still cared enough to show up. Each day stretched endlessly, filled with unanswered phone calls and unopened letters she drafted but never sent. Why bother, she thought bitterly. What words could bridge the growing chasm between her and the world outside? The loneliness gnawed at her soul until it manifested physically. Her appetite vanished, her sleep grew restless, and her once vibrant spirit dimmed. One cold winter night, unable to bear the weight of her despair any longer, Mrs. A stood on the balcony of her second-floor room, clutching the railing. The icy wind stung her face, but it paled in comparison to the storm raging within her heart. She imagined stepping off the edge, surrendering to the void below. It wasn't just sadness. It was an all-consuming darkness that whispered cruel lies that she was forgotten, useless, and better off gone. Just as she leaned forward, trembling hands gripping the railing, a nurse passing by noticed her and rushed over. That moment saved her life, but not her hope. Uncle Joe, too, found himself trapped in a similar emotional prison. After his injury from overexercising left him wheelchair-bound, he withdrew completely. His friends, many of whom were dealing with their own health struggles, stopped calling. Social outings dwindled to nothing. He spent most days gazing out the same window Mrs. A often stared through, waiting for someone, anyone, to knock on his door. When weekends came, he'd sit by the phone, jumping at every ring, only to find telemarketers or wrong numbers. The crushing disappointment became a ritual, a reminder of how invisible he had become. On particularly bad days, he'd open old photo albums, tracing the faces of loved ones who had either passed away or drifted apart. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he whispered apologies to people who weren't there to hear them. For both Mrs. A and Uncle Joe, the lack of meaningful social interaction wasn't just painful, it was suffocating. Their minds, once sharp and curious, now clouded with foggy thoughts. Simple tasks like remembering appointments or holding coherent conversations became Herculean efforts. Depression settled in like a shadow, stealing their joy, eroding their memories, and leaving behind a hollow version of who they used to be. They weren't just aging, they were fading, slipping away piece by piece, unknown, noticed by a world that seemed to have moved on without them. And yet, despite their suffering, neither spoke openly about their pain, fearing judgment or pity. Instead, they endured in silence, prisoners of their own minds, clinging to fragments of dignity while the rest crumbled around them. The relentless march of time brought not only physical and emotional challenges, but also financial burdens that crushed the spirit of those in their golden years. For Mrs. A, the weight of medical expenses became an unbearable anchor, dragging her deeper into despair. Every month she faced an impossible choice. Should she spend her dwindling savings on heart medication or buy groceries to keep herself fed? The cruel irony was that both were essential, yet she could no longer afford them both. One evening, as she sat alone at her kitchen table with an empty prescription bottle in one hand and a nearly bare pantry shelf in sight, tears streamed down her face. Her children had promised to help, but their own families struggled to make ends meet. Desperation drove her to sell cherished possessions, a wedding ring, antique furniture, even her late husband's prized watch, all for a few more months of life-sustaining treatments. Each item carried memories. Each sale felt like another piece of her identity slipping away. Uncle Joe's situation wasn't much better. After his injury left him wheelchair-bound, the cost of physical therapy and medications skyrocketed. His fixed income barely covered rent, let alone the mounting bills piling up on his desk. Too proud to ask for help, he began rationing his pills, cutting doses in half to stretch them further. What started as a desperate attempt to save money quickly spiraled into disaster. One morning, Uncle Joe woke up feeling disoriented, his vision blurred, and his body trembling uncontrollably. Rushed to the hospital, doctors discovered that his dangerously low dosage of blood pressure medication had triggered a cascade of complications. He spent weeks recovering, riddled with guilt over how his actions had endangered his life and added even more debt to his already insurmountable pile. "I thought I was being smart," he muttered bitterly during a rare moment of vulnerability. "But now I've made everything worse." These struggles weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a broader tragedy unfolding silently across countless households. Many elderly individuals found themselves trapped between survival and dignity. Mrs. A often heard stories from fellow nursing home residents about selling homes they'd lived in for decades just to pay for surgeries or treatments. Others whispered about skipping meals to afford prescriptions, their bodies growing weaker from malnutrition. It was heartbreaking to see people who had worked tirelessly all their lives reduced to such desperation. Yet society seemed blind to their plight, leaving them to navigate this gauntlet of suffering alone. Even when assistance programs existed, navigating the complex web of applications and approvals proved overwhelming for many seniors. Mrs. A once attempted to apply for aid but gave up after hours of frustration trying to understand forms written in language too technical for her weary mind. Meanwhile, Uncle Joe avoided seeking help altogether, fearing judgment or pity. Both were victims of a system that failed to protect its most vulnerable citizens. Their stories served as stark reminders that aging isn't just about declining health. It's also about battling systemic neglect and personal sacrifice. As they clung to whatever scraps of hope remained, their daily battles underscore the urgent need for compassion, reform, and support, not just for themselves, but for every elder facing similar hardships. Against the backdrop of mounting health challenges and financial struggles, Walking emerged as an unexpected lifeline for many in their 70s. For Mrs. A, it became nothing short of a miracle, a second chance at life she hadn't dared to hope for. Just months after her harrowing fall that left her bedridden with a fractured hip, doctors delivered another devastating blow. Her risk of stroke was alarmingly high due to years of neglecting cardiovascular health. The diagnosis felt like a death sentence until one physician suggested something simple yet profound: walking. At first, the idea seemed laughable. How could such a basic activity undo decades of damage? But desperation drove her forward. She started small, just 10 minutes each day around the nursing home courtyard, clutching her cane tightly. Day by day, those hesitant steps grew steadier. Months later, not only had her blood pressure stabilized, but scans revealed improved circulation in her brain, a testament to how consistent effort could rewrite even the grimmest prognosis. Her family watched in awe as the woman who once struggled to stand regained enough strength to walk unaided, proving that sometimes salvation comes not from grand gestures, but from quiet persistence. Meanwhile, Uncle Joe's journey with walking showcased its transformative power on muscle and bone strength, a stark contrast to his earlier tragedy. Before embracing regular walks, he was barely able to rise from his wheelchair without assistance. His muscles atrophied from months of inactivity following his injury. Simple tasks like reaching for a book or standing up felt insurmountable. Then came the turning point when physical therapists introduced him to light daily walks using a walker. Each step was agonizing at first, every movement laced with pain. Yet within weeks, something remarkable happened. His legs began feeling stronger. His balance improved noticeably. What used to take immense effort now seemed almost natural. Friends who hadn't seen him in months were astonished during a visit when he greeted them standing tall instead of slumped over in his chair. "It's like I've been reborn," he confessed tearfully, flexing arms that had once trembled under the weight of grocery bags. Comparing his former self to the man he'd become painted a vivid picture of resilience, an inspiring reminder that mobility isn't lost forever if nurtured properly. For both Mrs. A and Uncle Joe, walking wasn't merely exercise, it was rebellion against the limitations imposed by age and circumstance. It symbolized defiance, a declaration that they refused to surrender to despair. Their stories intertwine seamlessly with others facing similar battles. Neighbors noticed changes too. Where there had once been silence in hallways filled with residents resigned to their fates, there were now echoes of determination. The rhythmic tap, tap, tapping of feet hitting pavement as more seniors joined the movement. Even those initially skeptical found themselves drawn into this newfound culture of vitality. Walking proved to be more than physical therapy. It became emotional armor, shielding them from the loneliness and helplessness that often accompany old age. Through each step, they reclaimed fragments of independence, reminding everyone, including themselves, that aging doesn't have to mean fading away quietly. Instead, it can mean rising stronger, defying odds, and finding joy in the simplest acts of motion. As walking became a lifeline for both Mrs. A and Uncle Joe, they soon realized that maintaining vitality after 70 required more than just putting one foot in front of the other. It demanded a holistic approach to health. For Mrs. A, this revelation came when she stumbled upon an unlikely hero: nutrition. After years of eating whatever was convenient or affordable, her doctor suggested she try incorporating nutrient-dense foods into her diet. Lean proteins like chicken and fish, leafy greens rich in calcium, and healthy fats from avocados and nuts. At first, the idea seemed daunting. How can food make such a difference, she wondered skeptically. But desperation pushed her forward. One morning, as she prepared a breakfast of scrambled eggs with spinach and a side of yogurt topped with almonds, something miraculous happened. The fatigue that had clung to her like a shadow began to lift. Her energy levels soared, her bones felt stronger, and even the persistent joint pain in her knees started to subside. It wasn't overnight magic, but rather a slow, steady transformation. Each meal became a small victory, a reminder that healing didn't have to come from pills alone. Sometimes it could be found on her plate. Uncle Joe's journey took a different turn when he reluctantly agreed to add light strength training to his routine. The thought of lifting weights, even lightweight dumbbells, felt absurd at first. His body, still recovering from months of immobility, screamed in protest during his first session. Every movement was labored, every muscle fiber screamed betrayal, and doubt clouded his mind. "I'm too old for this," he muttered under his breath as beads of sweat dripped down his forehead. Yet something inside him refused to give up. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps it was fear of returning to the wheelchair-bound life he despised so much. Whatever it was, it fueled his determination. Slowly but surely, those initial struggles gave way to progress. By week 3, he noticed his arms no longer trembled when reaching for a bookshelf. By week 6, climbing stairs without assistance became possible again. These milestones weren't just physical triumphs, they were emotional victories, proof that resilience could defy age. Their stories intertwined once more as they shared their discoveries over coffee one afternoon. Mrs. A marveled at how balanced meals had transformed her once frail frame into something resembling strength again. Uncle Joe recounted the grueling yet rewarding process of rebuilding his muscles through gentle exercises. Together, they realized that these complementary activities, walking, eating well, and strength training, formed a powerful trifecta against the ravages of time. They weren't merely surviving anymore. They were thriving, defying expectations set by genetics, finances, and loneliness. Their newfound vitality wasn't just about living longer. It was about reclaiming control over their lives, piece by piece, day by day. And while challenges still loomed ahead, they faced them not with dread, but with hope, armed with knowledge and perseverance. The allure of walking as a simple yet powerful remedy for aging had inspired many seniors to embrace it wholeheartedly. But for Mr. B, this enthusiasm turned into a cautionary tale about the dangers of overexertion. Determined to defy his age and reclaim vitality, he committed himself to hitting the widely touted 10,000-step goal every single day, a benchmark he believed would keep him youthful forever. What began as an invigorating routine soon morphed into a punishing regimen. Ignoring the subtle protests of his body, aching knees, throbbing hips, and fatigue that lingered longer each morning, he pressed on, driven by the fear of succumbing to frailty. Then one fateful afternoon, while pushing through his usual route despite feeling unusually weak, disaster struck. A sharp crack echoed through the air as his brittle bones gave way under the relentless strain. He collapsed in agony, clutching his leg, unable to move. The diagnosis was devastating. A fractured femur, requiring surgery and months of painful recovery. For Mr. B, what started as an act of resilience became a grim reminder of how easily determination could spiral into harm when not tempered with wisdom. Equally perilous was the danger posed by incorrect posture during walks. a mistake that almost cost Mrs. C her independence. Like many others her age, she had adopted walking as part of her daily routine without realizing the importance of proper form. One chilly morning, eager to complete her laps around the park before the sun rose too high, she leaned forward slightly, hunching her back to combat the biting wind. Her steps grew hurried, her arms stiff at her sides instead of swinging naturally. Suddenly, her foot caught on an uneven patch of pavement, sending her tumbling forward. The fall was brutal. She landed hard on her wrist, which snapped under the impact. As paramedics rushed her to the hospital, she couldn't help but replay the moment in her mind. The careless tilt of her body, the unnatural angle of her stride, all contributing to a catastrophe that could have been avoided. Doctors warned her that poor posture not only increased the risk of falls, but also placed undue stress on her spine, potentially leading to chronic pain if left uncorrected. These stories intertwine seamlessly with the broader narrative of aging's challenges. Both Mr. B and Mrs. C were victims of well-meaning intentions gone awry. Their struggles highlighted the delicate balance required to stay active after 70. While walking promised immense benefits, it demanded respect for individual limits and attention to detail. Friends and family watched these incidents unfold with heavy hearts, recognizing the fragility of life at this stage. Conversations shifted from admiration for their dedication to concern about the risks they unknowingly took. Neighbors whispered warnings during community gatherings. Don't push too hard, or make sure your posture is right. These lessons weren't just personal. They resonated deeply within their social circles, urging others to approach their routines with greater mindfulness. For both individuals, the aftermath served as a turning point. Mr. B learned to scale back his ambitions, focusing on shorter walks tailored to his body's needs rather than arbitrary step counts. Meanwhile, Mrs. C invested time in learning correct walking techniques, practicing small adjustments like keeping her head up, shoulders relaxed, and arms moving rhythmically. Though humbled by their experiences, they emerged wiser, determined to share their newfound knowledge with fellow seniors. Their journeys underscored a universal truth. Staying healthy after 70 wasn't about grand gestures or rigid goals. It was about listening to one's body, respecting its boundaries, and finding joy in sustainable progress. In the twilight of life, where every day feels like a delicate balancing act between vitality and vulnerability, Mrs. A and Uncle Joe discovered that thriving after 70 wasn't about clinging to one miracle solution. It was about weaving together a tapestry of habits that nurtured both body and mind. For Mrs. A, this realization dawned during a particularly harrowing week when she noticed her energy plummeting despite sticking to her daily walks. Her doctor gently reminded her, aging isn't linear, and neither is health. What worked yesterday might need tweaking today. This advice became her mantra as she crafted a meticulous schedule, a symphony of walking, balanced meals rich in nutrients, light strength training, and even short meditation sessions before bed. Slowly but surely, the fog of fatigue lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. She marveled at how these small adjustments allowed her to reclaim control over her aging process, proving that with discipline, it was possible to swim against the tide of time. Uncle Joe's journey mirrored hers but carried its own unique challenges. After his fall from improper walking posture left him bedridden for weeks, he vowed never again to take his body's signals lightly. He began journaling each morning, jotting down subtle changes, aches that lingered longer than usual, moments of dizziness, or sudden fatigue. At first, these notes seemed trivial, but they soon revealed patterns that could have escalated into serious issues if ignored. One evening, while reviewing his entries, he noticed an alarming trend: sharp pains in his calves after prolonged sitting. Alarmed, he consulted his physician immediately. The diagnosis: early signs of deep vein thrombosis, DVT, a condition that could have turned fatal had it gone untreated. Thanks to his vigilance, Uncle Joe received timely intervention, a blood thinner regimen, and guidance on movement breaks throughout the day. It was a stark reminder that listening to your body wasn't just wise, it was life-saving. Their stories intertwined seamlessly, forming a blueprint for others navigating similar waters. Both learned that aging gracefully required more than resilience. It demanded adaptability. They shared their insights during coffee mornings at the community center, urging neighbors to embrace holistic routines and remain attuned to their bodies' whispers before they turned into screams. These lessons weren't merely practical, they were emotional lifelines, offering hope to those who feared the inevitable march of age. Together, they prove that while time may be relentless, it doesn't have to steal joy, independence, or dignity. Not if you fight back with awareness, intention, and care.